Hello. Today I wish to review some of the terms that we determined and talked about the other session. I also want to talk about slowing down our talks. I understand people are in a hurry. They want you to get to the point. That I can do. I can get to the point. I can answer questions. But people want quick answers, and they want you to talk fast, and they want you to hurry up, and they think nothing of interrupting you, and also deflecting conversations, not chewing on what somebody says, no matter how profound it is. But here, in this talk, we're going to be talking about some fundamentals of life, a searching for improvement, dealing with harder issues, dealing with truth, wisdom, virtue, what can be done to better one's life, what can be done to understand life in general, to review some of the concepts and the moral attributes that people have given us in the past. They need to be reviewed and questioned and pass the test of our own thinking, our own critical thinking. We've accepted many truths, many moral truths from our peers, our family, our church, our community, really before we had time to learn to think. So we adopted them. But in order to have a firm foundation, one should go back and review those things that we accepted. Certainly we trusted our parents, but truth hasn't got to do with trust so much as you want it to test through reason. You want to make sense to it for your own acceptance. And if you find that yes, your parents were correct, then fine, that's great. But if you test a moral code, for instance, and you can ask questions, you can ask other people, what do they think, and sort of review and try to verify or to find out what went wrong. Certainly, you don't want to be living a principle that's incorrect, even though your parents might have lived by that rule. Doesn't matter whose rules they are, if they're not true to nature, if they don't follow nature's rules of what is right and wrong through reason, then you're in trouble. You cannot stay to the path when you're going sideways. You have to start back again and get back on the path and to go forward, or you'll be going through briars and turmoil. So we're not insulting our friends and family who gave us guidance when we were young. We thank them. But a wise person will review them when he's has the ability to think straight through reason and some critical thinking. And sometimes this doesn't take that much. It takes time aside. It takes some contemplation. It takes some meditation or a meditative state during contemplation, pondering. I think right now of an image on a little island near the shore. Someone sitting on a rock looking out at the sea. Having wide thoughts. But it doesn't have to be there. It can be in a dark room. But it's usually a peaceful place where you can put your thoughts in order. And it's got to be slow because we're dealing with some fragile ideas and concepts that need to be examined. You can't do it with a lot of noise, people talking. It's very difficult. We have to move slow and methodically in the right direction. And that's why I'm talking about slowing down when we're trying to find truth and understanding and moving forward in a just way. We're dealing with the core of our being. When we try to find out the truths about ourselves, our personality, our character, our principles that we rely on to make decisions every day. We get in trouble, we don't understand why we're in trouble. We have to step aside and think about it. Think of what's going wrong in our life. We keep going backwards, we don't go for what is the problem? So we need time to think about it. That's a slow process. Slow, methodical process. Decision making, awarenesses, realizations. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. And these talks might seem slow, methodical, but it starts here. If we're going to make some inroads on our character, it's got to be serious and focused. I don't like to say something that I later find that I was wrong. I felt I've made an error today already in my speech, in my talk here. I questioned something I said. So we slow down into a meditative state in these talks. We take a deep breath and relax. And we put aside some time to enter a realm of meditative thought. What's important? Truth, wisdom, virtue, deep satisfaction, tranquility, magnanimity. All these are important words that we want to search out so that we can improve our life and the people around us. For we are not an island. We are all connected. We all know that through DNA and archaeology. We know that for years now, that we are connected. And if you do unto others, they will do unto you. You need that connection. Because if you keep doing things to others, for others, and they don't reciprocate, well, you have to realize that they aren't contributing to that moral ground that you set forth. So you will expect someone to return the favor in some way, sometime, or you get very hostile and frustrated. And that's what's happened a great time. People say, well, I'm sick of helping people. I'm looking out for myself now. It seems to be the way they say it. I've been hurt. I've been shouldering another person in a relationship. It's time for myself. I can understand that to a degree. But you should take time for yourself if you've been abused and not having anyone be nice to you in return. However, the principle does not change. Sooner or later, once you recharge, once you've got yourself together, once you're thinking clearly again, once you've made advances on your own character, your own realizations and awarenesses, you will then be able to share this with others again. So, being selfish is a temporary situation. Recollect yourself. It can take time, but temporary in that in the long run, you are a social being. You are connected to others. You should want your grandchildren and children living a better life than you had, avoiding the sorrow and pain that you've come across. And how you do this is often outlined when you teach them. We are a teaching animal, and we don't want our grandchildren to suffer as much as we have, or experience pain or just hardships. So we give them an outline, we give them tidbits of how to avoid this that we've learned. So this has been natural to our species, and it's because we do feel that connection with other people. Now, this was all basically to slow the speech and pattern down of these talks, because perhaps 50% of the audience is going to be upset because they're not fast enough. Youth likes things fast generally. They have a lot of energy. They get bored easy. So I understand that. But that is not going to pressure the rest of us. We want to talk about serious things and focus. So let's get into it. Now, everything we talk about, the application of philosophy and wisdom, I do understand that. I talk about it in the last couple of talks. But today I'm going to talk about theory, and then we can make some of those applications. But you need to examine the terms we talk about. If we don't examine the foundation, or we don't make a good foundation for our talks or discussions, and understand what we're talking about in each term, especially the most important terms like wisdom and truth, we are subject to ambiguity. We are subject to getting off the path. And when that happens, we have to start over. And some people like to do that. They like to be critical. There was a story about in the Greek days where they used to have slaves come in and read oftentimes for a group of men, free men. And once there was this, so they were in a session where the Greek slave was reading, or a slave was reading, and one member kept interrupting the reading, to correct the reader for pronunciation of a word every 5 minutes. Finally, the host said, "That's enough. We all know what he means. We understand what he means. Therefore, I want to go on and understand the meaning of what he is saying and reading, the importance, what I can get out of that. I don't want to keep interrupting him and destroying the thought process of the rest of us." So there are people who seem to like to stop the flow in order to perhaps correct somebody or make them feel good. Now, everything I say could be disputed. Every sentence I could be disputed because of the language we have, the language we use in order to find truth. I've expressed this before. You can take a word, a meaning of a word, and twist that around to make the second or third meaning of that word within even a paragraph or a couple sentences. That's called the rhetoric, art of using words in a way to persuade somebody. And this can be a beautiful, eloquent use of language. And it's nice to have fluent rhetoric and use of words together to form a beautiful sentence. Someone told me that if you ask it properly, you could get anything. So it is a powerful way. But if it's used to deflect, if it's used in the wrong way, to cause commotion, to take away the thought of what was going on, it can be very divisive or destructive, rather. Especially, it seems nowadays we see this trend. So we have to be very, very careful with people who like to show their talent of disruption. One of the examples is that everything is relative. So if you say a sentence or you say what you think is true, someone can interrupt you. Well, it all depends on how you look at it. And that's very true, but that's something that can easily deflect the conversation right away. Now, I'm not saying that you should allow someone, if someone gives a incorrect hypothesis or a conclusion of a hypothesis, it has to be questioned. But to interrupt just for the sake of interruption, you go off on a tangent. And therefore you lose the struggle to move forward. So these are the things we have to be aware of and be careful of, or we won't get anywhere. And unfortunately, we find this very prominent nowadays. So we will move forward slowly, methodically, and try not to get disrupted. Because the journey of truth is a long one. Because you can always improve. That's a nice thing about what is set up in the world, that we can improve. There's always another mountain. There's always another valley to go over. And you become more improved. And when you become more improved, you have a better well-being. You feel better about yourself. You have a deeper satisfaction. When you worry about it, you look back and see how far you've gone. And you see people making the same mistakes, going in circles. So that's a reward in itself to make you realize that you're doing the right thing. And that's what we're going to talk about, how to do the right thing so we don't go astray. When you go astray, you hurt yourself and others. You have to get back on the path and go forward anyway. There's only the laws of nature. There's only really one way to improve. There are different paths that take longer and longer, but if you stay steady to the right path as much as possible, you could get ahead further with less effort. So the slower person, being cautious and focused, can improve faster than someone who is faster and makes a lot of mistakes. I think the hare and the tortoise, the story of the hare and the tortoise, explains some of that. Now, that being said, I do want to review a few terms that we started talking about. The title of this talk, the title of the podcast, the series, is called Philosophy, Poetics for Peace. I'm not going to dwell on it, but I do want to clarify that in general. We did talk about philosophy, the meaning of philosophy, so we can review that a little bit now. Philosophy means love of wisdom. I think generally, if you talk to an academic, or most people would agree with that. The dictionary seems to agree with that. It's not love of knowledge, it's basically love of wisdom. Now, a philosopher is a lover of wisdom. We can assume that's correct. Now, we know what love is generally. And wisdom, we talked about that, meaning it's an understanding of what is, understanding knowledge, putting things together between different images and observations, and being able to make a critical analysis through reason, and coming out with an idea, a constructive thought, constructed conclusion. We do that by taking observations and making a hypothesis or assumption and going about, say, and verifying it through testing, experiment, observation, by verification. Now, if we have a problem, we say, why did this go wrong? What, my parents told us this and I was hurt time and again. So you start to evaluate, you look for verification of your new idea, you put things together and you say, well, that doesn't seem right. So perhaps you go to the dictionary, perhaps you go to the encyclopedia, perhaps you go to a reader like the great books, or to Harvard Classics, where you have some fairly intelligent people to rely on what they thought of the situation. So you look for people who might have experienced this, who have spent time studying it. So you get some kind of verification on some of your ideas. You might experiment on some of these ideas. So this is the beginning of making a conclusion, a reevaluation of things, and does it make logical sense? So this is the technique we want to start developing in order to make decisions. And once we accept this, to be more confident, we experiment with it, and we begin to make it as a habit. If it works, it seems right, it's verified, you've experimented, you put it in action, then you move forward. This becomes a habit eventually. Perhaps, if it's that firm, it becomes a firm principle that you rely on until you have a set of principles to rely on. And in case of how your conduct is in this world, how you act with other people, that becomes your moral compass. What's right and wrong, what's good and evil. Or it becomes a part of your character. So that's why when we talk about truth and wisdom, that's why it's important to slow down and focus on these things. Now, as far as poetics, the word poetics is a broad sense. Use poetry is part of the word, but poetry is art form. It's eloquence in words, putting together words in an eloquent, artful manner. But it's also broadly into aesthetics as well, and even rhetoric, because that's the art of persuasion too, with words. So all art and aesthetics can be broadly accepted in that word. So in a broad sense, we're talking about the flow. In the Eastern philosophy, they talk about flowing with the energy source of the world, so that you flow through life. And when you're going down the path of seeking truth, you have a steady pace. It's almost a flow in the way you do it. You gain a certain technique and to move forward. So you want to do it by not going off on tangents and not going off on the side of into the briars and getting hurt all the time. If you stick with the principles of truth and what works, then you will have it easier. More graceful. And I will put that in Poetics too. It's really about finding grace to move forward to improvement on a graceful level. It's always easier to move forward in a graceful manner. It's almost like you are flowing. They say the runner's high, when they reach a high, or even an art person will understand that when they reach a high, I find myself walking sometimes at night and I forget I'm walking. I'm thinking, I use it as time to think and meditate, meditative state, pondering something. Meditative state is not necessarily the meditation that we talk about, or some people talk about, where they blank their mind out totally. In a meditative state, it's a quiet state where contemplation of an idea can take place. So, I forget I'm walking, and I'm just thinking fluently about something. And when we're moving forward, we kind of want to reach that state where we don't think about hardships. We think it's about an opportunity to move forward toward improvement in our life. To meditate, it's an opportunity. We don't think of it as work. We think of it as moving forward. We think of it as an enjoyment. We feel better afterwards. We make a conclusion. Plato said the highest energy is an idea. So if we do take a walk and have an idea, an awareness, a realization, then that's great. That's great. That's the highest form of work, a higher form of energy, which is a positive thing. That's what I think he was saying. So, third word is peace. Now, the peace I'm talking about, I believe, I would like to think in terms of peace with, besides the regular peace with oneself, peace among man and animals, and brotherhood, harmony with the universe, one with the path of going toward truth, learning what truth brings us. Keats said, truth brings beauty, beauty brings truth. So, truth is beautiful. It's an opportunity to improve while we're here on earth. And it's curiosity that also motivates people. Sometimes it's not being hurt anymore. I want to do things right. I'm tired of being hurt. I want to do it right this time. A lot of people don't get on the right path until they were hurt. Whatever the reason, moving forward in the right direction for improvement and betterment for yourself and others is a good thing. Matter of fact, most of the early Greeks, which we like to look back on and review, believed that goodness was what man ultimately aimed for. And most philosophy, with a few sidebars, maintains this, that we do what is best for us, we aim for it, and sometimes what's best for us, we think what's best for us in the short term is not necessarily for the best in the long term. So we have to sort that all. That's what life is about, sorting that out. Understanding, wisdom sorts that out. So we'll understand what's more important, the long term or the short term. What's the value? Where's the value lie? Short-term satisfaction or long-term satisfaction. Sometimes they conflict. Other times they may not. But it's important that's what wisdom develops, how wisdom develops. It's not, we don't go by common sense or we don't go by intuition, but we go by foundation of principles that we've decided were right. So we take a deep breath sometimes when we're going too fast, and we relax and we take a break, we settle down, we rest, then we get up and move forward again. So we want to do this in our talks as well. So we covered the title of our talks, the scope of it. There's one other thing that I want to mention, that there will be dealing mainly with ethics. There are other schools in philosophy, metaphysics, epistemology, logic, and linguistics. But we'll be focusing mainly on ethics. And ethics is basically how you conduct yourself, how you move forward toward betterment in your applications, in your character, how you struggle forward. Now, we want to apply these things as well in our talks. Unfortunately, people who talk about wisdom and philosophy are lecturers and teachers. They get caught up in talking or explaining things for what the students want, or the people that are paying them want, oftentimes. And they get away from what the basics of philosophy is. So we want to stick close to the basics of philosophy. And that is learning about the wisdom, improving wisdom for an application of a better life. For one that has guiding principles, a set of guiding principles that help us make decisions. This will lap over into common sense as well. We'll build up a fortitude and strength by habit, and this will become our character. So in time of stress, we will have a principles to guide us forward. So the stress won't affect us if it doesn't have to do with our true being. Doesn't have to do with our guiding principles, doesn't affect that, and perhaps we shouldn't worry about it so much. Because this is the choices, free will that we have, is to make choices. We have this, we don't have the car that's out front, the wagon, the house. Those are external things from our body and from our mind. And we might lose those, but they're really kind of a temporary belonging. The things we really have is our free choice of what we believe in, our opinions of things. That cannot be taken away. So, I'm going to take a break now. I'm going to take a sip of tea, and then we'll start in a few seconds. Okay then, I see that we're getting on in time, so I will not review or start something fresh on this talk. But each talk will go back and clarify some of the things we said in the past. I don't believe we ever understand the true meaning of wisdom. Socrates said, "I am not wise," although he was considered the wisest man, said by the Oracle of Delphi, who proclaimed him so. But he didn't say that, even though he was wise, because he only knew 0.0001% of what there is out there in the vast universe and beyond. And the meanings of life and truth. And so therefore he understood that he knew nothing really. So he was making sort of a joke, in a sense. Though he knew some things, compared to the vastness of understanding, he knew nothing. So, but proclaiming that he was right in a sense. So the journey is long for betterment, but it's a rewarding situation. When you look back at life, you see the turmoil and greed and terrible things that people do to each other, not being able to handle it correctly, not being able to be satisfied, realizing every day is an opportunity to grow. Whether you're in prison or high on a mountain overlooking the bay, or whether you're working, toiling, you can improve yourself. And this is what we are given, to make choices, our free will in order to make choices, in order to improve. For improvement is an activity. You can't do it sleeping. You need to be conscious effort toward it. You have to be using your thinking apparatus, your reasoning apparatus for a tool to move forward in a graceful way. We here want to develop this. Teachers of philosophy often are not teaching you to be wise. You got to teach yourself to be wise in a way, but they give you the tools often, but they could spend 4 years giving you the tools, but it's up to you to become wise. And sometimes most people coming out of the university are not wise. They have some tools. They also have some very, very bad tendencies that were taught to them that strays away from what we'll be talking about, is improvement of character, improvement of understanding of things around you. We want to keep it clean, clear, in a simple voice, simple understanding, so we don't get off the path. And when we start to get into technical jargon, this often destroys what we're trying to do. So we're going to be really looking at the true sense of philosophy. We're going to love wisdom, and we're going to try and understand wisdom, and understand knowledge, and understand principles, so we can move forward in a graceful way to better ourselves and others. And we're going to stick to that path. And I find that's the most consistent throughout history. I think morality has been consistent. There has not been a lot of improvement on this. The moral character of people thousands of years ago was excellent. Some people. And so that has remained constant. You don't need a lot of new science in order to be wise in that field. Now, metaphysics and physics and general science, astrology, the science of anatomy, all that builds on science that other people have developed and given us, and a lot of it's got to do with apparatus, using the proper apparatus and technology in order to advance. But wisdom of character, the principles have not changed. The tools have not changed that much. So anyone can do it. Well, anyone can become wiser. You don't need a degree. Socrates was not an academic. He was a teacher, and he did question some of the sophists and did hang around with thinkers. But he was an ordinary man with a family. But he was searching. So we have that choice. We have to start. Everyone can become wiser. As a matter of fact, in the early days of philosophy, if you were not yourself a better man, if your character was not good, then you weren't considered a wise man at all, or a philosopher. I think the word philosopher came later, actually. But you were not regarded as a philosopher unless you could show that you were a good person, a wise person, not full of double talk, not full of degrees that hang off your shoulder, but we'll talk about that later. The point I'm trying to make is that everyone can become wise or wiser. We have to stick to the terminology, not get confused. A lover of wisdom can start as soon as you have the thinking apparatus intact to reason and to use common sense. And look back at your principle that you've tested and you approve of, and use that. Take a deep breath in a situation where you're going to make a decision. Do not do things on impulse or emotions. They've been misutilized nowadays because people have told us things that seem sweet to us, but when we do them, we get hurt. So we have to take a deep breath before we make decisions if we can, and fall back on our principles to make that decision. Does this help other people? Does this help me? Is this for the betterment? Is it finding truth in a temporarily or in a long run? So these are the things we're going to discuss in the future. All right, well, thank you for listening. Goodbye.